Long live the king.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences. We'll get on with the show in just a minute, but first a quick word from my sponsor. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, Kiender.co.uk. Kiender stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to Kiender and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
Got a big one for you today, Zoo Tycoon. This is a big Kickstarter which I think is fulfilling as we speak. It was also at Essen. This is from a new publisher designed in Switzerland, and this has got a lot of people interested because obviously everybody sees the word zoo on it and immediately compares it to something like Ark Nova. We'll talk about that a bit later, but this is based on the computer game, so it has the same license as the original Zoo Tycoon, which, if I'm right, turned into Planet Zoo. I'm not sure if they're the same franchise or anything, although Planet Zoo's the one I've actually recently bought on Steam because, I don't know, I just fancied trying it. I watched a lot of Josh Let's Game It Out videos where he messes around with Planet Zoo. Check out his channel, it's funny as anything, it's so good. But, you know, I like zoos, I like animals, I'm just a big animal fan, and obviously I love Ark Nova. So I was definitely interested in this, and this is a review copy produced by the publisher, so many thanks for that. But a big game about running a zoo which is more concerned with the happiness of the animals rather than how many animals you have. Okay, a little bit different. But does it work though? Because bearing in mind it's a first game, it's, you know, first designers, it's Kickstarter. You know, that's a few red flags. It can raise some problems, and we've seen some of this in the past, but I was very hopeful that this was going to turn out to be a hit. The question is, has it managed it? Zoo Tycoon has you running your own zoo. So you've got your board with places where you can put the enclosure tiles, which are essentially just 3 different biomes of square tiles that you can place down. But what it's primarily concerned with is the happiness and welfare of the animals. So you have an animal trade board, which is where you can get different animals from ostriches to chimpanzees to, you know, to bearded vultures, whatever. And these animals come in different genders, male and female. What you're essentially trying to do during the game is maintain a balance of your popularity and your conservation. You have various tracks on these that get you money and get you various rewards that players will be leveling up as the game goes on over a course of 7 rounds. And there are 4 phases, each determined by seasons, of which you'll start off with generating offspring for animals. Then you'll work on the animal trade board in order to get new animals and possibly trade away other animals. There's no currency in this game. It works on it's kind of weird. It works on a trade system where all the partner zoos basically just give and take from each other. They've done their research. I think this is how it kind of works in real life, but, you know, I'm no zoo expert. Autumn is where you can build new tiles on your board, so you can essentially build new enclosures. You can put little buildings on them, like, you know, gift shops or chip stands or whatever, and essentially build yourself up. And then in the winter, it's mostly just about paying some taxes, getting more income, and essentially an admin phase. You do that for 7 rounds, and then total up the amount of popularity and conservation points that you have, and your score at the end is essentially the lower of the 2. Yep, we've seen that plenty of times, haven't we?
Of course!
Now that's a very basic overview because there's a lot more going on in this game, but I'll explain those little elements later. First up, let's talk about other games. Everybody's asking, is this like Ark Nova? And the answer is pretty much in 90% of the way, no. Honestly, theme-wise, it's the same. Yes, you're building up a zoo, but the mechanics and what you're sort of focusing on with the animals, the mechanics of how you get the animals, you know, what you've got to keep track of and that, the scoring, all of that is fundamentally different. You know, in Ark Nova, you're playing with this massive deck of cards, which are all sorts of animals. Your enclosures are just little tiles that you flip over for size purposes and a few other little bits, and the map is kind of different with other players. But it's mostly about the card system and that action row mechanic, which I love in Ark Nova, that makes that game. It makes it a bit more tactical than strategic though, because obviously you got to play out what cards you get. Yes, you have some long-term objectives, but you're reacting to what cards you get, and you sometimes have to chop and change. This one is like not card based. The cards everybody has at the start of the game to represent the animals that are on this board. So these are all fixed in place. Aside from that, it's mainly about spatial awareness of how you build up your board, because how big you build the enclosures and where they do, how much free space they've got, are all fundamentally important. So certainly your map is more important here. This is also a much more strategic game. You have to think from the offset, right, what am I aiming for? Am I going to grab some of these, like, you know, special bonuses down here for having lots of particular animals from a certain region? Am I going to focus on animal welfare? Am I going to focus on generating a lot of offspring? Am I going to stick to savanna? Am I going to stick to the mountain, like alpine animals? And which animals am I going to have? Well, they're all on this board, so you can basically, a bit like Chicarion, if you've ever played that, can kind of from the offset think, right, well, I'm going to start off with some ostriches and some zebras, and then I'm going to migrate to giraffes, and then I'll probably get a rhino at some point, and then an Arabian oryx, or orcs, or however you pronounce it.
Me not that kind of orc.
Maybe I should have gone with the bold ibis for pronunciation. So yes, they are both zoo games, but don't compare the two. You could love one and hate the other. They're fundamentally different. Now, this is not a cheap game. You're paying a hefty price for this, you know, pretty expensive. So you're hoping that all the components are pretty solid. Well, it does look pretty. I mean, these, I can't recall if these is artwork or photography with filters and that, but either way, it looks beautiful on here. You know, this is a really nice board to look at. And all of this is replicated in detail on your tarot size cards. You've got a ton of these screen printed meeples for all the different animals. Everything from this tiny little, like, monkey lemur, whatever that is. I think that's just a weird monkey. To this rhinoceros here. To the giraffe here. I nearly said giraffe. Well, that was that weird. To zebras, to lions, everything. All of them are here in different shades for male and female. And they all come in these little tuck boxes. They have no lids. But there's a tuck box for all these different components. It gets a little fiddly sometimes to know which components go in which though when you've got them set up in the game, because I know in this one I put the gorillas and the chimpanzees in here. Or is it just the gorillas? I'm not sure. Yeah, just the gorillas. But then I look at another box and it's like, right, I got to put the little like monkey things in here. Wait a minute, is that a lemur or is that a monkey? And which type of monkey? I've got several here. It gets a little fiddly trying to figure out which ones go in which. But I love this tuck box system because everything fits in here nice and snug. Yes, you're not going to store this vertically, don't even try. But if you just keep things horizontal, all of these tuck boxes sit in here pretty snug. They don't move around. So you could actually just basically go boom, and there's most of the game set up. It makes setup quite quick for this. Or you could take the tuck boxes out and put them where they need to, but then putting them back in is a cinch. You just put the square ones in one area, the long ones around the outside, and there's even a bit here to hold cards. Preferably unsleeved, but you can hold some sleeve cards there. You've just got to put the rest of the sleeve cards on top. It's a little bit annoying, but you know, it's the way it is. But given that some games can give you really stupid inserts that they haven't thought about, the fact that this actually works as well as it does with this new thing, I'm down for seeing more games use this kind of tuck box thing. Remember Leaf that I reviewed recently? Similar deal. Tuck boxes, they may look cheap, but they're functional and they work. I'm willing to pay for those kind of things. Everything else though, I mean, the cards are good quality, you've got a lot of boards, there's certainly a decent amount of production quality for the most part. The only thing that I'm a little bit problematic with is this sheet. You have to slide this sheet for the gender trading board, and it's got multiple positions for all the different things, but you basically have to slide this underneath this board, and you know, depending where it is, you can see the bits come through the little holes. The problem is, it's not fixed to this thing, so if you accidentally scuffle it, you're going to slide the sheet and move it out of place. Not to mention that from a distance, it's hard for you to actually see inside these holes to look at the genders. You know, you've got a lot of table presence for this. It's quite a table hog.
Please excuse the crudity of this model. I didn't have time to build it to scale or to paint it.
And if you're at the opposite end of the table to where this chart is, you're kind of having to go, huh? And really squint your eyes to try and see in these little inlets. That can be really annoying for anybody who's sat at that end of the table, because frankly, you don't really need to see a lot on this board. You just need to see where your cubes are tracking, and that's about it. You know, there's little nitpicks like that, but for the most part, component-wise, I like what I'm seeing. There's just maybe a few little fiddly elements like trying to decipher what goes in what box and such that can get in the way, but it's not too bad. Theme-wise, this game does a great job. I love the fact that this is actually caring more about the welfare of the animal.
This is the life.
Stuff that I've seen in Planet Zoo as I've dabbled with it is represented here. I mean, Zoo Tycoon, Planet Zoo, you know, same game, similar game. I don't know the full history of the computer games, but the idea that this cares about the free space, like how much free space is in the enclosure, how many privacy shelters there are, how many creatures there are in the first place, and how they get offspring. All of these are represented so well here, to fair minute detail. You've even got to consider whether a particular type of animal has an alpha male and a bunch of females, or whether it has to be a bachelor group, or whether you can have mixed male and female in the same area. You know, a lot of zoo games wouldn't go into that level of detail to really represent the theme. This one does, and it's pretty good going on that front. The rest of the stuff, like earning money for things like, you know, chip shop stands and fries and stuff like that, is all pretty well and good. But I do also like the idea that you've got this trade system where there technically isn't a currency. Yeah, you need money to build stuff. Yeah, that makes sense. But you don't buy an ostrich. You don't sell a chimpanzee or a lion. You effectively trade them with other zoos. So the limitation is simply whether there is a supply and demand for specific genders. Again, a cool thematic concept, and it really does immerse you very well into the fact that you are building a zoo. And given that this game is quite strategic, there is a decent amount of thinking to do, because you have to consider a lot of variables. You know, if you have multiple animals in front of you, you've got to track the welfare of each one, and it's like, well, okay, money's quite tight. Do I spend it getting like more merchandise stands so that I can earn more money? Do I, you know, try and grab the male and females of a particular animal at this point? Do I want to produce offspring, or should I give them birth control pills to stop them doing that? What am I going to do with these offspring? I mean, if I have them at the end of the game, they're negative points, but do I grow them into adulthood, or do I trade them off in order to get other animals? There's just a lot of cool things to think about as you go through, which does make this not the biggest brain burner ever, but you can't autopilot this. You can easily throw yourself into a corner and struggle with money, or just struggle with like running costs and that if you're not careful. And you do need to plan ahead for what animals you intend to get and what bonuses they give you. Particularly, as I said, you have to balance conservation with popularity in order to do well at the end of the game. And that's not even including knowledge. You know, if you're going to up yourself up the knowledge track, you can get some bonuses in other areas. So, you know, that's something that needs to be considered. Are you going to build a massive enclosure of giraffes, or just a tiny amount? Are they going to have one of these cohabiting species in there for extra bonuses? Can the species even have a cohabiting species? You need to consider a lot of these, and that's before you even get to planning how on earth you're going to build it on your board, because some spaces are blocked off, and you might block off more if you want loans for money, and you'll find that space runs out pretty quickly when you're trying to build giant enclosures full of like 20 ostriches or something. You don't get to 20, but you know, they do replicate quite quickly, and so there's a decent amount to think about, and that's a good thing. It's certainly a heavy game, not one that I would suggest to give to midweight players even. There's a lot to think about. Is it comparable to Ark Nova in terms of that weight? Yes and no. I think Ark Nova has more to it because of the planning with the action row mechanic, but this is definitely going to test the brain cells. Now we gotta get on to some cons and give this game a little bit of tough love in a few areas. First off, this game is long, and I mean long. Ark Nova is a long game, I accept that, but I feel like I'm engaged all the time in Ark Nova, and certainly I feel like it's justified to an extent there, even though I wish Ark Nova could be a bit shorter. This has on the box 120 to 180 minutes. This thing does not even assume you're going to play this in less than 2 hours, and believe me, from a solo perspective, it It's tricky to get this done in less than 2 hours. 2 players are going to struggle to get this done in less than 2 hours, particularly with, tracking a lot of stuff. We'll get onto that later. But man, a 4-player game of this is insane. This game, I swear, I have taught to people and we have not finished it in a game night with 4 of us. And this is a game night or a session that lasts more than like 3 to 4 hours. This game can take ages with a lot of people, and you'd think it wouldn't with some fairly structured round sequences, but I think that 7 rounds is too long for this game. It really does need a couple of rounds hacked off the end in order to keep this to a decent length. And honestly, even if you have multiplayer in this game, it's not particularly interactive either. You build your own map. I don't influence what you do on your map, that's entirely your thing. Literally, the only bit of interaction in the game is simply whether you can buy and sell different animals. You get 2 trades, I think, with each in a round, and so if I take all the ostriches and you wanted them, then sorry, you can't get any. But if you're focusing on your own types of animals anyway, then for the most part that's not going to be a problem. Occasionally you might take something that someone else wants, but that's literally it. Other than that, this game has 0 player interaction. Ark Nova wasn't exactly dripping with interaction either, but I would argue that the conservation projects and a few of the other milestones that you're trying to reach in Ark Nova do mean that I'm paying more attention to players in Ark Nova than I am at any point during this game. Now, a few of these other aspects are going to be, for a lot of sense, Kickstarter tropes. This rulebook, for example, is definitely a Kickstarter trope. It's a large rulebook, yes, and it has a game overview on the back. But man, this thing needed to be run by a rulebook editor at some point. There's a lot of ambiguous language in here, and even then, there's a lot of text, not a lot of pictorial representation for stuff that really should be represented by pictorial examples. But you've got a lot of stuff to absorb in here. There's a decent amount of rules, and it's not written particularly well. There's a lot of weird oddities in terms of its layout. Here's a great example here. Later on in this book, it tells you about, let me show you, it tells you about what you get at the start of the, there you go. In the first arrival phase, you can ignore all requirements for animals, and you start with a level 2 or level 3 species, whatever, okay? This is something you really ought to know at the start of the game. I kid you not, it is explained on page 14 in the middle of the gameplay winter phase, which is the 4th one for the phase. Literally, it tells you what you start with before it tells you how the end of the game works. How the hell does that work?
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
It took a lot of time to get the rules down, and even when I was teaching it, rules errors were being made. I'm probably not even convinced I've played the game entirely correctly, because the rulebook honestly just isn't up to par with what I would want to see. Now, they have done video explanations of the rules, but the problem is these video explanations are dated at a time during the Kickstarter, which means components and various rule aspects are different from what the book is, so the videos aren't even any use either. I can't easily use this rulebook as a reference aid either, because yes, it's got a game overview on the back, but it's missing key points that I really do need to know during the game. The reference cards do a half decent job in explaining it, but man, you're gonna have to check this rulebook often, and when you do, it ain't gonna be easy to find what you need. But there's a part of this game that honestly could act as a killer in itself. It practically shoots itself in the foot because of this. There is an overwhelming amount of fiddliness in this game from 2 aspects. Firstly, you have a ton of stuff to track. You've got to track everything that's on your board in terms of enclosures, what buildings are where, and all that stuff. But you have all of this stuff to track on these cards, and it gives you a lot of information, but you need to bear in mind how many you can have on a tile, what the running costs are, whether it can have other species, the male and female aspect. Then you've got to work out like the offspring, and you have 4 cubes on these cards to track free space and shelters and number of, and every time you do anything in this game, you've got to adjust them and see what happiness level it's at for the purposes of welfare. There's all sorts of little things that you've got to track on top of, this popularity and Fini track. You've got to keep up to date with that, and sometimes you forget to level a bit up. But it's so much stuff you've got to mess around with that it's not smooth and it's particularly clunky. On top of that, the second aspect that gets in the way is the fact that there's definitely one too many things in this game, period. I feel like this game, as I said, is done by new designers, new publisher. I honestly feel that a different publisher needed to come in and consult with them and give some advice, because this game badly needs a streamlining element. There are certain rules in this game that this game could have just done without. There's a rule about buzz, which essentially has, like, if you give birth to an animal or get a new animal, you generate buzz for your zoo. Okay, so your popularity cube goes up here. The buzz goes ahead of the cube and determines your income. But you know, how the buzz is generated is not particularly well explained in the book, and it's just another one of these irritating little things that you've got to keep track of. On top of that, the most strongest phrase I can describe this game is exception to the rule, because there's a lot of exceptions to the rule. You know, you read the rules of how this particular thing works, and then you look at buzz and it's like, oh, but it actually works on this aspect. And then you look at this particular building and it's like, right, well, it works on this aspect, unless you put it here, in which case it does this. Okay, fine. You get this particular, you got this animal here. Oh, it works on this one. Unless it's got this. Unless it's got that. Unless it has this. There's a lot of these exceptions to the rule, which just makes it harder to learn and harder to teach. Everything's kind of deliberately trying to grind its gears as it goes forward, and that impacts on the enjoyment from the players. Even little things like these sideboards with the workers. You get free workers in a round. You can use one for free. After that, it costs. They have actions that they can do in particular sessions, but honestly, most of these actions you won't do. I mean, the autumn ones, the summer ones, perform an extra trade or the unexpected supply and demand, you'll rarely use those. In the initial phase, you've got birth control and breeding. You'll use them every now and again, but mostly you'll just use it as an animal keeping action just to level up your experience, or just stick it at the bottom to get a boost up a track. But again, this just feels like an element that didn't need to be in the game. Why not just scrap that entirely? You don't need it. Shave it off, simplify, not bulk up. We don't need everything to be like a revived kitchen sink game. And honestly, you could take out these workers and I would miss nothing.
We killed them and ate their livers.
Also, for a 3-hour game, like 3 hours plus, there's a decent amount of luck in this game in some respects. Yes, all the animals are on show, so you can choose them. So why do I have dice in this game? Why do I need those? Well, because of the offspring rule, which I don't get why it works like this. Basically, depending on what happiness level you have your animals at, they have a chance to produce offspring. It is entirely done by a die roll. For the most part, you want offspring. They can become more animals and you didn't have to trade for them. You can give them away relatively easily before the end of the game, and it also ups your buzz level, which gets you more money. So getting offspring is a good thing, particularly also as I think it also gets you extra points on the trade board at the bottom, yes, for the worldwide conservation breeding program. The problem is, it's random, and you can use a worker to re-roll a die. Yeah, but it's still random, and you have no other way to mitigate it other than making the animal more happy. So I could have 4 different animals that could produce offspring at 3+, roll the dice, get 3 1s and a 4. Like, only one of them produces an offspring. And, well, that was entirely luck. Somebody else who rolls lucky and gets offspring gets off with a better shot. Why is it that random? Could they not just produce offspring just like that? Could it not be deterministic? It just seems odd that in a 3 to 4 hour time frame, I'm supposed to base my entire ability to get more animals mostly on a random die roll. Why?
I'm lucky.
That's not a superpower.
Add to that little things that really don't need to be in the game, like event cards that have very little impact really, and honestly, event cards are a lazy mechanic in games. I hate event card decks because they're not always balanced, they just add extra complexity each turn, and honestly, I rarely see event card decks work in any Euro game. They should just be something that's banned, frankly, from Euro game design, because they just don't seem to work. You've even got little things like a donor card. Like, you flip over a donor card and it basically has a criteria, and if you meet that criteria, you'll get an extra enclosure tile each round. Whoopee-doo! And even then, yes, you know it the turn before, but you can't always do anything about it. Let's say you flip over a card and it says, alright, whoever has the most savanna creatures gets an extra tile. 1, I don't particularly care if you get an extra tile, and 2, if I focus my time on tropical rainforest animals, how exactly am I supposed to change and get a bunch of savanna animals to get an extra construction tile? It's not worth it, but again, it's a random element, and it's just another rule that you could have just chopped off the game and it didn't need to be there. It's kind of the defining feature of this game. Just very fiddly, very bulky, very clunky, and it spoils a lot going on here. So Zoo Tycoon has some good stuff going for it. You know, I love the theme that this one tries to portray. It really does represent zoo building with real life implications and the welfare of animals really well. And I do love that it did its research and put in that level of detail. I think the production quality, for the most part, is pretty sound. I love these little tuck boxes. The meeples are cool. It is a very expensive game, probably too expensive for what it is, but then that's Kickstarter first time games for you. They're always expensive. But you know, there's a lot of stuff to like from that perspective as well. I think it's a good thinky game. It's meaty and there's certainly plenty enough to consider from a map building element and tracking like the stuff on your animals. But I'm afraid I gotta give tough love and say that that's where the good bits stop. You know, this game has such a huge barrier in terms of its rule set, the rulebook quality, the clunkiness and the fiddliness. All of those things compound together to just ruin the experience for the most part. What I would like to see from this is, you know, those old like game shows, particularly those horrible dating ones, you know, where like a bunch of people get eliminated and then the person, like the focus point, gives them a lifeline to say you get to stay in the game even though you were eliminated. This is what I want to give to Zoo Tycoon. I want to give you a lifesaver card, okay? A lifesaver. I don't think I can recommend this game in its current state. There's just too many problems with it to make me want to bring it out, and it pales in comparison to something like Ark Nova. But I want to see you give this a second try because I think there's some concepts here in theme, in mechanics, and in look that I think you do brilliantly. Like, I think work really well. I want to see you come back with a Zoo Tycoon 2.0. Find a publisher who knows what they're doing, has done this stuff before, and can consult with you on developing the game. And I think that's where the problem is. This game just needed more development for maybe more experienced publishers and designers just to trim out the fat, to get rid of the fiddliness, to get rid of the clunkiness aspect, because I want to see this sort of game done well. I want to see a revised version of this with that fat trimmed out. I want to see you come back and get it right, because I think if you do that, you will have a belter of a Euro game here, because there was a lot that I liked here, and there was certainly stuff that I really want to see in a zoo game, but I can't forgive the stuff that makes this game problematic. It spoils a lot of other games when I see that sort of thing, and it's spoiling this one here. And it's a shame. It's definitely up there in one of my bigger disappointments because I was really excited to get into this, and I just found that it was a lot of hurdles to jump over, and I don't want to jump over those hurdles every time I play the game. So Zoo Tycoon, I'm afraid, for me, has to get an average 5 out of 10. It does some stuff well, as I said. Theme, looks, the cool components, the tuck box insert, the meatiness of the game, a lot of stuff is done well, and I have to give points for that. But a lot has to be taken off for just how much of a burden it is to play. Way too long, not enough interaction to justify the time length, way too much to track on these cards, way too much of, you know, a fiddliness aspect, too many rules in general, and a rule book that frankly just isn't up to scratch. You know, honestly, this game could have been rated lower if it didn't do the other aspects so well, but in its current state, I'm glad I got to try this. I'm just a little bit sad that it didn't turn out as well as I would like, and I gotta give it tough love. But please, bring this back. Put it back to take it back to the drawing board. Keep some of those good aspects. Take the feedback from those who play the game and report on these criticisms, alright? I want to see Zoo Tycoon 2.0 revised, because I think you can do it, and I would love to see it happen. But right now, 1.0, it just isn't up to par.
You cut me deep, Shrek. You cut me real deep just now.
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. What do you think of this game? Have you played it? Do you share some of my criticisms? Do you not find them a problem? Do you love the theme or not? Would you compare this to other zoo games? Do you think it should come back or go away? Let me know your thoughts down below, and obviously keep it civil. Don't forget to check out more content on the show, like perhaps if you want to find out another zoo game, then go check out my review of Ark Nova from last year and you can compare the two. Certainly I much prefer Ark Nova. 5 out of 10, 10 out of 10. But, you know, you'll hopefully be able to see the comparisons between the two. Until next time, remember, regardless of whether you can tell the difference between a zebra, a chimpanzee, or whatever the hell this thing is, it's still only a game. Bye for now, everyone.